Aloha, YouTube friends! You probably don't know, but Mrs. Tiki Envy is a 4th grade teacher in our home state of California. Part of her curriculum each year is to study the history of California and the California missions. In the summer of 2024, we went on a road trip and visited each of California's 21 missions, plus Fort Ross. We learned about the native peoples, the Spanish soldiers, and Father Junipero Serra and his priests. In between, we stayed at some of our favorite campsites, and we enjoyed a few tiki bars. We called it our Priests and Pagans Tour. We hope you enjoy this video remembrance of our journey. At the end of Volume 6, you saw us at Mission Santa Clara. It wasn't too long a drive before we were in Santa Cruz. Before visiting the mission, we stopped at our second luau's restaurant for some lunch. I can't tell who's more excited, me or the tiki. There was more great tiki decor at this luau's restaurant. They had some yummy food, too. One Mai Tai with lunch isn't bad, right? On to Mission Santa Cruz. Mission Santa Cruz, named for the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, was dedicated August 28, 1791 by Father Lawson. The church building you find today was built as a replica in 1931. It is 1/3 the size of the original mission, which was destroyed January 9, 1857.
Here was the original Santa Cruz mission, and none of that is still here. We're in that building towards the back part of it. That's all that's left. And the part we're in is about 200 years old.
Before the missionaries arrived, this area along the central California coast was home to the Yupai and Awaswas people. The native people were not always willing converts for the Spanish missionaries. In 1812, Father Andres Quintana was strangled to death by mission neophytes who were angry about the metal-tipped whip the Padres used for punishment on workers and children. Unfortunately, that is not the only violent chapter in Mission Santa Cruz's past. There was a pueblo named Branciforte across the river from the mission, which was founded with former prison convicts from Guadalajara. They took land for the mission and used its property at will. In 1818, California's only pirate, Hipólito Bouchard, approached the mission. He had already vandalized the mission in Monterey, and so the occupants of Santa Cruz took their valuables and fled to Mission Soledad. The men living at Branciforte Pueblo took advantage of the situation and looted the mission. The mission was secularized in 1834, and the buildings fell into disrepair. In 1845, an earthquake toppled the bell tower. It had held 9 or 10 bells. The current replica only has 1. In 1857, an earthquake collapsed other mission buildings. If you travel to Santa Cruz, the better story is the Santa Cruz Mission Adobe right next door. Built between 1822 and 1824, it is still standing and the best preserved Native American residence at any of the missions.
So even though the sanctuary is closed, this is the oldest building in Santa Cruz, 200 years old. And this was an adobe structure as part of the original building.
It was housing for indigenous families who lived and worked at the mission. It is the only surviving building of the original 32 in the complex and the oldest structure in Santa Cruz County. The Santa Cruz Mission State Historic Park now exhibits many fascinating displays inside the old adobe building. In this display, the museum describes how the natives held to their own practices even while learning the Catholic religion. They would sometimes hold secret nocturnal dances to keep their own religious beliefs alive.
Here's what these old adobe rooms look like before being restored.
In this room, the archaeological features of this adobe and past ones are on display. Some of the displays show how the rooms of the adobe were used by the native people before secularization during the height of the mission.
Here's what these rooms That's what it looked like when the natives were living in them, working for the Spaniards.
Other rooms show how the adobe was purchased, restored, and used by the Californios after the mission was secularized and sold by the Mexican government.
This display shows how after the missions and everything was secularized, the Irish came in and turned these into their own homes. They even put up wallpaper. But they kept the Virgin Mary. That's good. In this room you can see what the natives are doing. Blacksmithing and raising cattle. Mostly it's too hilly here for farming. And there's where the candles go down the tower.
Although Mission Santa Cruz no longer stands, its history is preserved in the mission replica and displays of the Santa Cruz Mission State Historic Park. It is worth a stop along the El Camino Real. After visiting Mission Santa Cruz, we made camp at Sunset Beach State Park. This was our last camp on the trip, since the next two missions are in LA where we live. It was foggy, but good for sleeping, and we had an uneventful drive home before we set out again to visit the last two missions on our list. Mission San Gabriel Archangel is also known as the Pride of the Missions, and was established September 8, 1771, by Father Junipero Serra. It is the fourth in the chain of 21 California missions. Archangel Gabriel, seen in the top center of the retablo, had the power to announce the will of God to people and foretold the birth of John the Baptist. To his left is St. Francis of Assisi, and to his right is St. Anthony of Padua. On the lower level, from left to right, are St. Joaquin, the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception, and St. Dominic. Each figure is made from polychrome wood and comes from the 1790s. The mission had to move from its original site by 3 miles in 1775 to improve conditions for agriculture. Once established, the new mission began its task of converting the native Tongva people. The Tongva, renamed Gabrieleño by the Spanish, occupied the entire Los Angeles basin, from the Santa Monica Mountains in the west to as far as Redlands in the east. They occupied the 4 Channel Islands just offshore and lived off the sea as well as the land. The Tongva arrived in the area about 7,000 years ago, and their culture was almost wiped out by the arrival of the Spanish. They were used as slave labor to build Mission San Gabriel. Despite this, between 1771 and 1834, around 25,000 baptisms took place. This was the most of any mission. Newly baptized natives were referred to as neophytes. This lithograph by Louis Corris shows natives dressed in garments that they wove at the mission or that were given to them by the Franciscans. At the same time, they are playing a native game of chance. The picture shows how the natives were creatively able to mix imported and local traditions in the new circumstances that confronted them. Still, some Native Americans rebelled and tried to escape the mission. This pen and ink wash image depicts Gabriel Moraga wearing the traditional dress favored by the Californios. Moraga lifts a corner of his heavy sleeveless coat, cuero, revealing layers intended to block arrows. The garment gave rise to the term soldado de cuera, or leather jacket soldier. Soldiers like Moraga would have been sent to retrieve any native who sought to escape the mission. Moraga's wife, Ana Maria Bernal, is dressed in the refined attire which signaled the emergence of the European social system in California. Mission San Gabriel served as a trade center because it was at the crossroads of 3 trails. It was known for its unique Moorish style, capped buttresses, and tall, narrow windows. Mission San Gabriel provided food for other missions and created large-scale viticulture in California. The Campo Santo, or Cemetery at the Mission, is the oldest in LA County. It is also the first Catholic cemetery in California. The crucifix is a memorial to the 6,000 Indians buried there. In 1834, the mission was secularized and entered into the rancho period of California history. One rancho is especially important to the students at El Rodeo School in Beverly Hills.
Old Spanish ranchos is right down here. Rodeo de las Aguas is what El Rodeo School is named after, and that is where Mrs. Smith now teaches.
No longer used as a mission, the buildings fell into decay. In the 1850s, squatters even set up part of the old mission as a saloon. Today, restored, renewed, and reopened after an earthquake in 1987 and an arsonist in 2020, the museum at Mission San Gabriel does an excellent job of telling the mission story and houses many artifacts important to the history of California's missions. The museum also does an unusually good job of telling the story of Native peoples past and present in the area. Before we leave Mission San Gabriel Archangel, let's step into the church. This area is adjacent to the west wall of the church and is one of the few rooms that is structurally intact. The barrel vault ceiling is original, along with many of the floor tiles and windows. It is used as a dressing area for the priests and altar servers before services. Just leaving the sacristy area is a staircase that leads to the bell tower. The current bell tower was erected in 1828 to replace the one destroyed in 1812. Mission San Gabriel Archangel has a beautiful sanctuary built from cut stone. Along the walls, as with all the missions, are paintings of the 14 stations of the cross. On the right is the pulpit. The pulpit is fastened to the wall and raised well above the floor. It is not known exactly when the pulpit was constructed, but it is believed to have been finished before the building's completion in 1801. The church is the final resting place of several Franciscan fathers buried here in the 1800s. I've already described the statues at the altar, but the reredos, the screen behind them, is original to the current mission and was commissioned by the King of Spain around 1795.
The roof here was put in the 19th century to satisfy the taste of the day.
The mission doesn't have an organ, but the baptistry features a hammered copper font brought from Spain as a gift from King Carlos III. The baptistry, along with the sacristy, stand as they originally did, and their walls, windows, and beautiful ceilings have remained untouched architecturally. The missions have become a symbol of all of California, and in these advertisements, Old Mission and Dos Palmas brands both make use of Mission San Gabriel Archangel for their advertising. And speaking of advertising, don't forget to exit through the gift shop. Before heading over to our last California mission, we stopped for lunch at a Mexican restaurant. It seemed only fitting. No tiki drinks, of course, but pretty good margaritas. Mission San Fernando Rey de España was founded by Father Francisco Fermín de Lausen, September 8, 1797. It was built to close the gap between the coast and Mission San Gabriel and is the namesake of the San Fernando Valley. The mission is named for Saint Ferdinand, King of Castile from 1217. You can still see his uncropped body at the cathedral in Seville. The figure here is actually of Santo Niño de Atocha from the Missions Museum. In the middle of the quadrangle is an original fountain modeled after one in Cordova, Spain. It was built around 1812 to 1814 and was part of the water system in the San Fernando Mission Garden. 100 years later, that garden was property of Mr. Leslie C. Brand, who donated a part of it to the city of Los Angeles for a park. When the Los Angeles Park Department undertook to restore the Mission Garden in Brand Park, the fountain was presented to Los Angeles by Mr. Brand. It was moved bodily from its former location, a distance of 300 feet, to its present site, July 4th, 1922. At its height, the mission had 121,542 acres of land and produced 12,868 bushels of corn and wheat annually. In 1819, the livestock numbered 21,745 animals. Overseeing all of this production was the mayor domo, the foreman of the mission ranch. His home is preserved and on display.
There's the domo's house. Looks like he had a dining room and a kitchen. And there's a baby and a hearth.
The mission is unique for its convento. It is the largest original mission building in California and 2 stories high. It was completed in 1822 after 13 years of construction and boasts 4 feet thick adobe walls. The iconic corridor features 21 Roman-style arches and unusual Moorish arches above the windows and doors of the living quarters for missionaries and visitors. Here is a view of one of the interiors. Let's tour some of the other rooms and displays.
San Fernando Rey de España. One of the vestments. Various saints. Virgin Mary. These guys look too happy. Father Lasuin Memorial.
I mispronounced Father Lawson's name in this clip.
In one of the cells the fathers lived in. Founder of this mission, Padre Lasuin. If you are the bishop, you get your own room. A little fancier than the cells the Padres used. Your own place to pray. Your own wall art. Very nice. As they call the governor's room. More dignitaries can visit. Do a little spinning wheel.
We'll see Mr. Hope again a little later. In addition to the domestic room displays, the convento building also features the mission's wine cellar, which may be the only wine cellar still intact at the missions.
Washed his feet before stamping the grapes. We're making wine, not toe jam. Please use with caution. Oh, all right. So it's about 100 degrees here today, but down here it's Maybe 70s, not that much cooler, but a little cooler. Here's a wine press. Like when I was a kid, this is what we used to press grapes instead of our feet after a while. I like this arch. This building's original to this mission.
Just like I am.
Nice.
There's also this display of the mission's meat smoking room.
Smoking room here. Smoke the meats. Down there. Back to the convent that way.
Most of California's missions are built with adobe bricks. Mission San Fernando has one of the original adobe presses on display, which would have been used to form them.
Tile maker. Now they are making the adobe bricks.
Unique to the mission is its Madonna room. It features hundreds of statues and paintings of the Virgin Mary and was probably originally a prison cell in provincial times.
This is the Madonna room. And they have over 300 Madonnas in here.
The mission's displays on the Native Americans are somewhat lacking, except for its large collection of figures showing Father Sarah guiding a native child towards the ways of the Catholic Church.
Here's the same image. Father Tiki Indian boy. There he is again. There he is again. There he is again.
This display seems to celebrate the priests while reducing native culture to being merely childish.
The latest in priest fashion wear. People stole. Nice.
That is not to say the displays on the Native Americans is totally lacking. There is this collection of baskets in the convento and a description of them making meal.
There you go, with a little explanation of making acorn meal, some of the Indian baskets.
The mission also features several original music scores and a large library.
The library. Quite a collection of books. Religious scholars on the walls. Popes. You give your lecture from there.
There were 3 different church buildings as the congregation grew. This is actually an interior model of one of them. The 4th Mission Church you will find today is an exact replica of the building erected between 1804 and 1806. The church is 166 feet long and 35 feet wide. The walls are 7 feet thick at the base and taper to 5 feet thick at the top. The interior furnishings were used in earlier churches. There were 3,188 baptisms, 2,449 burials, and 842 marriages at the mission between 1797 and 1846.
Baptism room here?
Soldiers at the mission were paid in part with food and supplies, which meant that the neophytes had to work harder than they normally would. Soldiers sold liquor and treated the natives as slaves. Leaner times led to insufficient harvests, starvation, and the neophytes fleeing the church. The 16th century gold-leafed reredos was installed in 1991. Pope John Paul II visited the church in September of 1987.
Cemetery?
The Campo Santo is the final resting place for several thousand neophytes and early settlers.
This one's special because it also has Bob Hope Memorial Garden. Bob Hope, you got his own garden here. And his grave is right down there. Bob and Dolores. 2,245 Native Americans interned in this cemetery between 1797 and 1852.
In 1834, the mission was secularized. In the 19th century, it served as a warehouse and hog farm. In 1861, the mission was returned to the church for preservation. After struggles to restore the mission, the Hearst Foundation gave a large gift in the 1940s to make the mission what it is today. In 1971, the San Fernando earthquake, and in 1994, the Northridge earthquake extensively damaged the mission. It has been completely rebuilt using modern techniques.
So there's an earthquake in 1994, the Northridge earthquake. And this building had to go through quite a bit of restoration. Earthquakes have plagued missions for quite a while. This one's got modern touches in it now.
Mission San Fernando Rey de España is an important stop along the El Camino Real. Woohoo! We did it! We made it to the end of the Priests and Pagans tour. What better way to celebrate than with a hot dog? Just kidding. Because if you walk past the facade, the pickup counter, and the plaque explaining how this is where the Doors recorded LA Woman, you get to this stack of crates. Open the door on the pickle barrel, and something amazing happens.
Tiki, do you have a reservation?
Yes.
Up, up, up the stairs you go, and into the Lucky Tiki Bar. And there's the Lucky Tiki himself. This bar had just opened near our home as our trip ended, and so we had to try it for our last bar of the tour. They had delicious and clever drinks, including this one, where you had to dig some of the ingredients out for yourself. They also had the ghost of Jim Morrison, which was on fire. We had a fantastic time exploring all of California's missions and some of its tiki bars. We hope you enjoyed it too. Nothing to do now but head on back down the stairs and to home. Aloha!